started work on a presentation for this, and I'll admit that during the course of starting to write it, I was somewhat thrown by a post on Libcom that Mike put up, saying quite rightly that as most people who he expected to come to this meeting were going to be involved with or sympathisers of one of a number of organisations, the ICC, the CWO, the Anarchist Federation, SPGP, or other groups, that it was likely that the majority of people here was becoming with the view that yes, the working class does need a perfect organisation, and then the argument is going to be about what kind of political organisation and what that political organisation is for and what it does. But that's not the only perspective to take on the question that perhaps the working class doesn't need political organisations in the way that some of us assume that it does, and that sort of deflected my whole thinking on how to approach this meeting, because as I say, my assumption was that the discussion was going to be about what kind of political organisation, and not whether or not we actually needed a political organisation at all. I quite happily say that I don't understand the argument that we don't need a political organisation, that political organisation is actually harmful to the prospects of communism or the working classes' ability to challenge and overthrow capitalism. I don't get that. I don't see how that argument can be true. So it's not so much that I disagree with it, so I don't understand it really. It seems to me that argument is based on, insofar as I do understand it, it seems to me that argument is based on certain fallacies about the success and or failure of the Russian Revolution. It's certainly true that the revolutionary wave of the early 20th century in the wake of World War I, I would regard that as a failure in historical terms. We're obviously not living in a communist world. The working class was not able to successfully challenge capitalism to the point that it was replaced and socialism was instituted, socialism was built. So to that extent, yes, the revolutionary wave following the First World War that ended the First World War, was a failure. Whether that failure was due to the baleful influence of the parties that were corrupted by Second Internationalism, I don't think that is an adequate explanation, or indeed it's not even an inadequate explanation in my view. It's an explanation that doesn't address the history of what happened at all. So quite rare that this leaves a presentation on the political organisation as the proletariat. I'm not entirely sure. So instead, I have some questions and some ill-formed thoughts that hopefully will provide a basis for, or some kind of starting point for looking at the question of whether or not the working class needs a political organisation. It seems to me that an organisation is at its basis a relationship between communists, between militants, between people who hold to the idea that capitalism can be overthrown and a more intelligent and humane social system be erected in its place. And at that kind of fundamental level, it seems to me obvious that the working class needs a political organisation, because we are communists because we believe that people as a whole are capable of discussing and sorting out their collective futures. And that means that we have to relate to each other and to other members of our class. At the most basic level, to me, that is what the organisation of the revolutionaries is. That's how we talk to each other. That's how we relate to each other in order to promote the idea of communism amongst the working class, to help the rest of the working class to come to an understanding of its historic role as being the class that will overthrow the current state of affairs and institute a new one. And we don't do that as individuals. We do that most effectively collectively. And that's at minimum what the organisation of revolutionaries is, as far as I'm concerned. The question then arises then, are these organisations real as it were, secretions of the working class? Do organisations come out of the working class, or do they come out of the will of militants? I would argue that they really are secretions. I can't get away from that word, but I don't really like it.
Emanations.
Emanations is good, is a better word, yes. Emanations of the working class. Yes. It is a better word. It's less slimy. It's less like something snails do. Sort of lost my train of thought a bit now, thinking about snails. Does the working class create organisations, or do militants create organisations? I think the working class does. I think organisations come together at a particular time under the pressure of particular events and can represent the highest point that the working class has reached at any given juncture of the development of its consciousness and need for organisation. Whether 100 years later those same organisations still represent that, or whether they get left behind by history and become, fossilised relics or something of previous waves of struggle, is, I think, a different question. Organisations, I think, have to always be responsive to what is happening, and it's easy for organisations, I think, to become insular and sectarian and convinced of their own rightness and their own historic destiny, but not actually alive to what's happening. I think this is always a problem that organisations are going to have, but I don't think that means that we don't need organisations. I think what it means is we need organisations that are aware of this problem and trying to do something about it, because it's the drive to organisation, it seems to me, is an inherently progressive one. But this again brings up the question of what are individual militants? Are they militants of the working class, or are they militants of an organisation? Again, this question of organisational conservatism. If the militants identify with their own organisation rather than identifying with the interests of the working class as a whole. It seems to me this is a sign of this kind of the problem of organisations actually detaching themselves from the working class and ceasing to act in the interests of the working class as a whole and becoming insular and sectarian and organisationally fixed, at which point I think this is a sign of the organisation's degeneration. So again, it's a danger that organisations can face, and it's a danger that revolutionaries, people who espouse revolutionary politics, can face, that they cease to actually put forward the interests of the working class and instead become mouthpieces for organisations that are no longer representing those interests. But again, I don't think this means that organisation itself is an inherently bad thing. But again, the question arises: is what is the organisation for? And if the organisation itself stops acting in the interests of the working class, then it becomes a barrier to the development of consciousness. It becomes a break on the positive drives towards overcoming the situation that we are in. And therefore, what is the role of the organisation? My view in the current period is that the main roles of the organisation are to propagandise and to help develop working class consciousness by reaching out to and discussing with people who are searching for the answer to the question: how do we go beyond what we have? What else is the role of the organisation? I'm not entirely certain. But in some senses, I think the organisations have to act as a memory for the working class. That organisations themselves come about in periods of class struggle. That the organisations need to take the lessons of those struggles, and at some point in the future, when struggles rise, the level of struggle rises again, to be able to in some way generalise the lessons that have been learned from previous struggles. But I'm wary of trying to claim that the entire role of an organisation is essentially didactic or preachy, or just about trying to teach the working class lessons. It isn't. The organisation isn't just a sort of revolutionary library or treasure chest that gets unpacked of all of the lessons of struggle. Obviously, there's also an element of intervening in struggles that are going on to try and generalise lessons, to try and bring up connections between different factors of the capitalist crisis, of people's lived experience, and how the working class has at previous periods posed its own answers to the questions, to the dilemmas that people face, and that the working class as a whole faces. But as to what else the organisation does, I'm not entirely certain. However, as I have pages and pages of half-written notes and thoughts about this. And I could waffle on for at least another half an hour, not really getting anywhere. I shall stop and throw the discussion over. If anybody has got anything they would like to say on the subject of the working classes' need for an organisation. That's a good point. Is somebody going to chair or a chair? Do we need a chair?
Yeah. So,
okay.
do you want to go first? I'll chair.
What I was going to say is, previous changes in the production have taken place because a new form of property ownership has grown up within the old. With the transition to communism, this doesn't apply. We don't own the means of production. We're not forming a new form of ownership within capitalism that's going to take over a long period. What we have instead is ideas and organisation. That's really what we've got to work with. And these are the main tools. Unfortunately, there isn't objective logic that says organisation to defend immediate needs, to regulate the level of wages, for example, within the capitalist market, labour market, would logically take us over into a challenge to the type of society we're living in. Back to Engels, 1860s. The problem is not the level of wages, but to end the wages system, isn't it? That's what he argued. So the change has to be a conscious change, and that does require organisation. But we're in this bind where it doesn't follow logically from immediate experience that we can comprehend the need to change society.
Mike. I just want to throw in a couple of things to try and make sure that we generate discussion at a live level. I suppose one of the things I wanted to say was that it seems to me that the current situation is that the working class knows that it doesn't need a political organisation. There's lots of political organisations around, of which some are represented here today, and there are many others. In fact, there's so many small political organisations claiming the revolutionary mantle that you could your toes and your fingers count them all probably. But they all think the working class needs political organisation, and that they are, if not it, at least somehow the forerunners of it, or the kernel of it, or in some way, the basis of some organisation that the working class one day, somehow, miraculously, will recognise it needs. And that seems to be the situation today. And it's important to see that as the reality of what it is, because it's a huge difference, isn't it, from a past era when, with some justification, you could say the working class itself recognised a need for trade unions, a need for cooperatives, a need for political parties to represent it. But that is a past era. Those organisations, became incorporated into capitalism. The revolutionary groups that are around were at the time still attached to them in one way or another, or still maintained or owed their existence in some way to relate to those organisations. That was the connection they had. That was the extent to which there was some vital link between the two, and that has all gone. So that's the kind of point that I start from. The other side of it is that the question I thought was, I don't know where the question for this meeting came from actually, something a bit unclear why it came or how it came up. The thing I struggle with, I suppose, is the language as well. I was saying this to Comrade earlier, that some of the language that is used, particularly in our kind of milieu, and to some extent amongst leftists as well, it's a kind of alienated language, you know. I mean, we had an example of it with excretion, but, you know, the working class doesn't it need it, or does it create it, as though it's some kind of thing, you know, not real people like us, you know, with real situations. That kind of worries me a bit. And then it comes on to, and that then comes into another bit of the language, which is people talk about, and I get confused here, especially with the groups in our media, they talk about the need for a revolutionary organisation, or then sometimes they talk about the need for the revolutionary organisation, or the party, and you're never quite sure whether the organisations are talking about something that might emerge in the future, could emerge in the future, not quite clear how, but might do, somewhere out there, somewhere, we don't know where, somewhere in the future, or whether it's talking about their own organisation. And to be honest, it often gets mixed up, you know, because it comes down to that thing, is a lot of these small groups think, you know, even if they're not what is required for the future, they're not what's required, or they're not what the working class needs, or whatever, but they still think, in their heart of hearts, whether they admit it or not, that somehow they're already creating that beginnings of that thing that's needed. So I have a bit of trouble with all of that. I suppose because, having been in lots of political groups myself and associated with others in the past, and now not in any group, as some others here are, I have become more sceptical of the nature of so-called revolutionary groups today, and how they exist and how they operate. And there was one thing that did strike me, that the last part, it's not that groups don't recognise it, and the ICT is not represented here today, but they posted their little text on this as a part of the introduction to this meeting, and they make a very good point. I certainly don't think they understand the full depth of this, because they say, likewise, the relations between different parts of the organisation, now this might be their organisation, it might be some other one, and therefore cannot constitute an island of communist relations within capitalism, quite right, and so on. But they point out, time between necessarily bear the scars of capitalist society. Communist organisations here and now, all these things bear the scars of this society. So we all know that we can't create communism, we can't create cells of communism or a preformed kernel of communism within capitalism. But is it worse than that? I mean, I'm saying it is worse than that. My actual experience and our actual experience of the way all these tiny little groups actually operate, and the way they think of themselves, and the way they're organised over long periods of time, is very much centred of capitalist society, you know, and that part of that is because the way capitalist society itself has changed. You know, it's that we're not dealing with the same animal that we dealt with in the Russian Revolution or the German Revolution, or even, dare I say, the Spanish Revolution. You know, we are not dealing with the same animal. And until we get to grips with the animal we're dealing with, I'm not sure we can get on the right track. So even if we could agree that somewhere along the line, if we're to have a revolution, it obviously must have a political aspect and therefore a political expression. How that might come together, I've got my own ideas about that, I'll talk about that later. Then it doesn't necessarily bear any relationship to any of the existing groups as they are today. Shut up, otherwise we're going further.
I'm trying to remember everything. It's quite difficult, and I'm sure if it was written down I could analyse it and make a much better job of it than I can do sort of like talking off the top of my head. But I think you know, one of sort of like, for me, sort of you know, the main reason why the working class needs a revolutionary organisation. I think, you know, I don't know if there's a problem with political, I'm not quite sure about that, I'll speak about that. Yeah? Is a revolutionary organisation only a political organisation? I think you were trying to get rid of it more, isn't it? There's multifaceted task of this organisation. I don't see what's wrong with using the word party, but the word organisation is more appealing to some people. But certainly a revolutionary party, I think it's because the working class, without this revolutionary theory, without this revolutionary party, which is the bearer of revolutionary theory, cannot, by its own struggle, come to communist class consciousness. And I think that this idea that you were saying that the working class secretes, produces, creates, whatever word you want to use, without, I don't want to be fetishistic about simple items of vocabulary. I think that's an ITC fault. The working class on its own does not create revolutionary organisations by its own efforts alone. I think that there must be an interplay between some sort of revolutionary theory and the working class itself. And I think that the revolutionary party is the transmission, it's the conductor of revolutionary theory to the working class. It's not totally simply a one-way process. It's a two-way process. The working class feeds the revolutionary organisation, the revolutionary organisation feeds the working class. Nor are they, sort of like an alien class characters. The revolutionary party is largely made up of workers. However, the initial formulation of revolutionary theory does not come from the working class. I think that's the point. I think that this is the point that I'm stuck with. When I said at the beginning, I'm still developing. Yeah, this is the point that I'm trying to work myself through in my own mind. And I've written on my own little leaflet, which again I'm going to say I'm not claiming that this is a CWO leaflet. This is what I was thinking of 2 days ago. It's not possible for the working class to spontaneously generate such a consciousness. And I think that is the full point of it. I think that is the reason why we need a party. Without the party, the working class will be dominated by capitalist consciousness. This organisation will not lead it outside of capitalism.
There's a lot to think about what Mark said and what I think Steve said too. I think there's I'll just pick up some of Steve's stuff, which I think has quite a lot of implications, which I don't think are positive, on the relationship between consciousness and organisation. It was a bit counterintuitive, I thought, the leap you made in what you said, because the phrase you use, like conductor and stuff like this, and then you bring in the sort of disclaimer at the end that it's the two-way process where all that came before led in the opposite direction of the which I think it's because in order to understand I think because you say in this I think somewhere that consciousness is not like a static thing, it's something to do and stuff, but I think in order to understand that relationship between the kind of reception of people's experience and reality of the experience, and then how movements and struggles and stuff emerge, you have to understand that it is that experience that mediates between the organised forms in which people will struggle through the experience, how we experience that in society. And it's not clear that I think Mike's point on how changes in capitalist society structure and are produced by struggles in which that you have to understand that, because a lot of Marx talk was talk about opposite no fair. You can come back if you think it is sort of the organisation or the working class as like a generalised abstraction, which I don't think that has to exist. There isn't a like single homogeneous experience within the working class of capitalist society various facets of exploitation and oppression that it entails, and the responses and forms of these experiences over historical time periods that are quite specific will produce, and that they produce themselves, I think is quite I think that whole language around does that working class sort of condition just totally override into a sort of into a nothingness that has no kind of specificity on that experience, which I think is quite important. I just discuss the sort of I'll honestly with the Irish concern, I'm sure.
Somebody else on the list, so you can carry on.
No, I don't think. I think I'd end up like Mike talking for too long.
I never consider myself a good public speaker. I think that I'm good at talking to a computer screen. However,
there's no argument.
I think one of the points that you raised, the sort of the two-way street between, the high and mighty theoreticians and the poor, the sort of humble workers in civil, I think that that's a sort of like a stereotypical portrayal of the anti-party perspective, isn't it? I think I'm just going to read you a little bit of what I wrote, and I'm more comfortable doing that. It says, however, once formulated, such a consciousness, revolutionary theory, is perfectly within the intellectual capacity of workers to grasp and further elaborate. There's an absolute need for significant numbers, then a majority of workers to become class-conscious theoreticians, and that means there must be a link between the evolving theory and the class. So it's not simply a case of, we've got this huge bunch of thickos and we're going to give them this wonderful truth like Moses. We are going to present what we know, and they're going to take it further. We are not going to organise them, they're going to organise themselves. Just like, for example, each one of us comes to a revolutionary organisation, and after a while, we can start saying, you're wrong there, this is why you're wrong. We've got the same principle. We didn't know it all to begin with, we learned, and then we contribute.
Anybody else? Yeah. Right.
You'll
carry on.
Someone else must.
Carry on. Go on, Mike.
Because I said earlier that I got some vague ideas, and one of them was that I had this problem with the organisation or the political party, and I suppose in disagreement with your point of view here, but what struck me was that if there was any chance of a political party in the sense of an assemblage is not the right word, but I can conceive of a concept of a party being something which is not one organisation necessarily at all, not one party with a centralised kind of organisation at the head of a conscious working class leaving it all to the revolution, but rather just the representative, the accumulation, if you like, of all the most militant minorities within an expanding class struggle. Because we've seen that sort of thing before. We've seen, at least in high points of class struggle, situations arise where individuals, small groups, have in fact emerged with ideas that are a challenge to capitalism. And these are not necessarily all outside of the existing organisations. There may be existing organisations, but there are also other minorities. they emerge from the process of struggle. They don't just, they're not clear-sighted, they're not formulated all in one go, and certainly existing organisations around may help in that process. But what I can't see is that is a once and for all situation, because it happens in the course of big strikes, like it did with the miners' strike, like it has with some of the big strikes in France, like it did in '68, and so forth. Generate the whole whole area of discussion, generated new groups, regenerated some old groups. But there was out of none of those situations did we experience any emergence of one kind of organisation, one vanguard, one arrangement for sort of pushing everything forward. None of those things seem to exist. And even if because class struggle is not something that just evolves forever in one direction, but has ebbs and flows. Whatever is, I think the way you put it before, whatever is left behind from each high point in the class struggle may or may not contribute to the next process, because in the intervening period, this is what organisations have to exist without the impetus of that large, intensive class struggle. Alright, you can reflect on it, but you spend all your time reflecting on it. It's great. It may be a nice intellectual pursuit like we do here today, perhaps. It's interesting. It keeps us alive. Some of us may stay with our particular group. Some, as we know, as a matter of fact, will leave. Some will move from one group to another. This is the experience we actually have of what's going on over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That's what actually happens. And so each time this happens, it does depend on the intensity of that struggle. What is created, what comes out of that process, and it's never exactly the same every time. It's never exactly the same group of people every time. But I would kind of hope, and it is only a hope, that if, and this comes back to the point about where does class consciousness come from, because what it can't seem to come from, and we've certainly no suggestion that, the SPGB in this in 1904 propagandizing for communism, socialism, communism. What do you think about its views about Parliament and that? In terms of trying to convince people that communism is a good idea and it's the only solution, it's been doing it for damn near 100 years. It's no better at all and no further forward than it was when it started out. The idea that you can propagandize socialism, that you can create a consciousness, or that you can get a big enough organisation that can, create a consciousness in advance of the kind of struggle that's necessary to defeat capitalism. Just seems like, surely we should agree with that much. It's just a nonsense. We can't get there. So how is conscious? If we can't build up an alternative means of production within the shell of capitalism, then what are we left with? We're only left with the possibility, that there are aspects of the way capitalism operates in terms of its economy and its social structure, which will create the objective conditions possible but not inevitable to generate a sufficient level of class struggle and opposition to capitalism that will create the conditions for a change of consciousness. That's the only possibility. And you look at, but it's still only a possibility. Look at the world around us now. Things are crap, aren't they? I always think the RCC's got one good at description, might not be a good theory, but decomposition's a fucking good description about what's going on. The economy is like there. Look what's happening in Greece, Italy, Spain. There's a massive emergence of class struggle. To make your point, it creates a lot of minorities, a lot of people discussing and arguing and challenging their ideas, but it hasn't created any new vanguard out of all of that. It's created a lot of smaller vanguards, if you like. None of the existing communist organisations that I know of, including your compatriots in Italy and others, the ICC in Spain or wherever you want to go, none of these organisations have had any significant impact, and yet those are some of the best conditions I would have said that we had. But what it has done, it has created a lot of other minorities who at least are looking at anti-capitalist possibilities. It may all disappear, it may all fade. Capitalism may yet again fuck everything up, and we may be back to square one. But those are the only conditions, the only circumstances in which I can see mass class consciousness, as opposed to, small groups here and there, small minorities, coming together. Is that pessimistic? Not necessarily. No. I think there's lots of possibilities in what's happening now, and if the potential for a crisis to deepen is still there. All this stuff about we're out of the shit already, that you get from the papers, I think it's a load of rubbish.
Mark? Well, I'd agree that outside of kind of periods and places where the crisis is pushing the working class into trying to find alternatives, then you're not going to get a mass communist consciousness. I entirely agree with the SPGB's idea of merely propagandising for socialism is a non-starter. I mean, the ruling ideas in any epoch are the ideas of the ruling class, of course. So socialist groups, communist groups don't ever have the clout. We don't control media empires or anything. So using kind of mass media to try and put the case for communism and expect it, and if anybody even could do that, then expecting it to work, I agree. It seems like a complete non-starter. It's when the working class starts to struggle that it learns how to struggle. I think I believe that revolutions create revolutionaries, not the other way around. So yeah, I mean, I'd entirely agree that it's the struggle that produces militants. I mean, my background is that when I was 14, the miners went on strike. It was obviously a big thing in County Durham. I was only 14. It was a big thing in County Durham, obviously. It was one of the instances of working class action that led me to kind of start thinking about who I was in the world and how the world worked, and class positions and capitalism and alternatives. I think it's struggles that produce people who reflect on those struggles and who take part in them, or who see them happening and try, either way try and learn the lessons of them. And without struggles, there aren't going to be any lessons either learned or anyone to learn them. So yeah, I mean, I agree that idea that merely propagandising communism is enough is a complete non-starter. Whether, as you say, whether that is a pessimistic view, I don't think it is either, because I think that capitalism constantly creates situations where people have to struggle against capitalism, and therefore it constantly produces situations in which people are going to be questioning the system and posing the question of what can be beyond the system. Whether that creates a new party as a single entity that the whole of the working class recognises, no, I don't think that's feasible either, because until you have a situation where there is massive struggle throughout a lot of the world, throughout a lot of the working class in a lot of the world, then that situation of creating the World Party isn't going to exist. Yes, smaller struggles that are isolated in particular places or particular sections of the working class are going to produce small groups of people that then start to question. So until there's a situation where the world revolution is really on the agenda, I think the creation of the world party is not on the agenda either. But one of the things that can happen is that smaller groups of people can talk to each other and try and generalise lessons. And I'd take the point that Ronan was making, that what I started with was something very general and possibly verging on imaginary rather than real. I think one of the things is about generalising things, and you can't hold on to too many specifics when you're generalising things. But minorities that are produced through struggles can talk to each other, can discuss with each other, and that's got to be better than the minorities that are produced in struggles not talking to each other and not trying to learn each other's lessons, not trying to set up a debate that will increase consciousness. I mean, we're all here. We don't have to be. I'm sure we've all got other things we could do on a Saturday afternoon, some of which might be political, some of which might not be. But I think the fact that we've got people here from the CWO and the ICT didn't come, the AS didn't come, the SPGB didn't come, but sorry, are you SPGB? Hello, from the SPGB. The SPGB did come, and there are some of us who aren't in any organisation at all. Oh, and sorry, Barry, are you here as a representative of the commune, or are you here as Barry, who happens to be connected with the commune? Are you still connected to the commune?
Yeah, I still manage the blog, and
right.
But I'm still done there. Yeah.
So we have people here from different organisations. We have people here from no organisation, and we're at least trying to find ways of talking to each other, which I think is more useful than not. But I don't know what else could be expected in this situation. The world revolution isn't on the agenda, so we're not going to create the world party, because that's what the working class does at the point where it becomes a possibility, and at the moment it isn't a possibility. All we can get is smaller groups that are hopefully reflecting on what's been happening, trying to carry those lessons on, and being alive to the developments that are going to happen in the world, in the working class, and in the working class consciousness.
Actually, I was surprised by. Sorry, Barry first.
No, it's not.
No, right. I was surprised by this supposed comment on LibCom, which I don't read now, that as everybody would be in an organisation, it wouldn't be worth coming along to the meeting. But I think the people who've organised the meeting should be congratulated for creating a
I don't think anybody said that.
Sorry,
that's why I understood what you said.
I'm sorry for being unclear. The comment was that I think everybody that might suggested that everyone who came along would probably be either involved with or supporting an organisation, and therefore the question would not really be does the working class need an organisation, but what sort of organisation does the working class need?
Right.
And that was what.
I mean, anybody who comes to the discussion group is already thinking outside a certain kind of framework. You're thinking outside a kind of box, and I think it's good that you've organised the meeting as you have organised it, because to be quite honest, I think it's human beings meeting face to face where you get a real confrontation of ideas. I've been recently on Facebook for the first time in my life, and I'm appalled by the absolute non-communication of all the people who are posting on these places, and they just talk past each other endlessly for hours. And so a real genuine discussion where people can actually test their ideas out against those who are face to face with them is to me a far more proletarian form of proceeding. And particularly at the present time, when I think a lot of people who are in political groups deliberately don't discuss with each other. There's a kind of sort of, I'm in my group, you're in your group, and we have our own personal agendas, and we go that way, and so there is no confrontation of ideas, which is the only way we can clarify our ideas. And if you don't actually get out there and do it, then all you do is you end up in a self-revolving kind of autism of yourself, thinking only about my ideas, which is where, of course, I must begin by challenging Mike. Mike began by saying, not you, Mike, not mine. Mike began by saying that the working class knows it doesn't need a political organisation. The working class also knows it doesn't need communism. The working class also knows it loves capitalism. Right? If you start from such a position, you are starting from pessimistic. Revolutionaries are those who don't accept the present, and that's our starting point. It was intended, of course, as a remark to make a criticism of the existing revolutionary organisations. I'm not going to defend those revolutionary organisations, but I am going to put the thing which Mike referred to partially historically. When Mike referred to the past, he talks that revolutionary groups in the past, back in the revolutionary wave or in the time of social democracy, were much more related to the class than we are today. And I think, if I get this one right, Mark also said at the beginning of the meeting that there are certain high points in history when there are revolutionary struggles which lead to the formation of revolutionary groups, which are then, when the struggles die down, left over like the flotsam and jetsam of a receding tide left on a beach. Yes? I said that's a bit more poetic. But the key question is this, and obviously looking at the whole history of the working class, in the last century opened with the 1905 revolution, the First World War, the Russian Revolution. The working class appeared to be on the verge of becoming a class that was capable of changing the course of history. It didn't turn out that way. We suffered a colossal defeat by the fact that we were unable to extend, or the capitalists were able to prevent our extension of the revolution from one corner of northwest Russia to the rest of the world. And as a result of that, the working class has been on the retreat ever since. If you look at the leftovers of the revolutionary wave that ended in 1921, we had tens of thousands in the Italian and the German communist lefts. Even at that time, Trotskyism was still could be considered a revolutionary current, and there were thousands more in them. But then the Second World War does not give us the same echo. The capitalists are managing their system much better. We no longer have to go to fight for king and country. We go to fight for such things as anti-communism or anti-fascism. Abstractions which, of course, are very useful for mobilising ideologies. And humanitarian, of course, is what we're coming to. But, of course, the 39-45 war was the last occasion on which we were all asked to be mobilised as an entire class. And I'll deal with war another fine day. But the situation we are in relation to war is now different to what it was. It's now public opinion against the war, not the class struggle against the war. And for us to try to impose a class struggle agenda on it is much more difficult. And I think that the whole problem we've got is that we have been a class in retreat for a century. We have been fragmented. The production process has shattered, which has forced us to rethink where the class struggle is going to come from. Previously, our organisation were great supporters of the idea of creating groups around factories. because they were the citadels of the working class. They were where we had the power to paralyse the capitalist system. Now we know that that's not the case. When people are in factories of 100 or less, they're not, and they're fragmented, it's not so easy to organise on that basis. What's likely and what appears to be happening is that the real break for people with capitalism is going to take place on the streets in the form of movements, not like Occupy, obviously, because it had a capitalist agenda or a liberal capitalist agenda as against a monopoly capitalist agenda, but it will probably take place initially in movements like this, but without then it can't progress unless it's also accompanied by the paralysis of the economic system by the working class coming together. And this is the thing that everybody talks about the fragmentation of the revolutionary groups, it's not happening because the revolutionary groups are inadequate. It's happening because the working class is fragmented. It's not that the working class don't want revolutionary groups. They neither want nor don't want. It's a question of the fact that we reflect the fragmentation of our own class. And the only way, as Mark has just said, and I think most of the people would agree, is that the position can be reversed is that if there is a new wave of struggle, and it's not going to, I don't think it's going to come in the very near future. Right? In fact, we've said in the CWO for 30 years it's not coming in the near future. When new people have arrived and said you sign up for life here and you get nothing, but you won't get ego massaging, you won't get any kind of great boost. You volunteered for this, and this is what you volunteered for, and that's what we're doing. And it may be a long time, given that the fragmentation of the working class, the creation of individual contracts has also created an individualised idea of what it is to be a worker, and this is Steve's mistake. Because you do start from the individual worker and talk about consciousness. Consciousness is a collective product of the working class. And I don't care who makes it, but to fall into the Kautsky's error of saying that it's this or that person is to diminish your own argument for the need for a revolutionary minority. And that revolutionary minority will come about because, as Mike said in his bit, we only have two things, as Anton Pannekerk said: class consciousness and organisation. And unless the two, organisation obviously is two things. Organisation is class-wide, and it's also about the conscious militant minority. Because without the clear militant minority to act as a catalyst and a lead within that struggle, we are not going to arrive at communist consciousness. And as I said, I don't think it will happen quickly. But then, why should it happen quickly? There's nothing more stupid than revolutionaries when it comes to, we're like World War I generals sometimes. We seem to think that the next one more push will get us to revolution. But we can't transcend history. We are the products of history. And what the working class will become is difficult yet to see. But I've recently taken up the study of astronomy. I've read Pannekerk's book on astronomy, and I discovered his astronomical predictions were as bad as his political ones. But he said in 1950 he wrote, "Astronomy is a science, it's finished." But anyway, and we had a man on the moon 17 years later. The study of astronomy has made me have a slightly longer historical perspective. It's taken us 4.5 billion years to get here, right? It's only 10,000 years ago we were still in the Paleolithic, and in fact in the Middle Paleolithic. We weren't even in the Upper Paleolithic. 2,000 years ago we were still in the bloody Iron Age.
10,000 years ago, the Middle Pal ended about 25,000 years ago.
I thought I was sitting next to an archaeologist. So you take my point. And this is a question that we know that capitalism is rotten right for revolution, but it can only be finished off by the working class, and it can only be finished off at a certain point when they lose complete control. Now, if you remember back in 2007, a lot of people thought that they had lost control. We had the meeting in Birmingham with the Midlands Discussion Group then, and all sorts of people said, all those people have now disappeared back into the woodwork.
Coming out the woodwork.
Phil's the only one who stayed out of the woodwork. The assumption was that the capitalists couldn't manage the crisis. Well, they may not be able to manage the crisis. It may not be over. It may be that, I mean, I agree with whoever said it, that if this is a recovery, then it's the most anemic one that capitalism's ever produced. And certainly on the ground, we're suffering, or the most of the working class is suffering more to produce this recovery for no particular purpose. So they are creating a crisis situation within the working class. But don't worry, the TUC have been warning them about this, and they may introduce some policies to deal with it. However, going back to the perspective question, the perspective has to be that at a certain point they globally lose control, because globally they have increased control. They are managing the economy. The G20 was held this week. I know they didn't get around to talking much about the economy, which is probably a good thing, because they can't solve that any more than they can solve the Syrian crisis. But these occasions have led to the continual management of the world economy through its crisis. These can only stand the strain of so much. At a certain point, the economic crisis and the imperialist imperatives which hold them together at the moment will break them apart. And at that point, there will begin a reversal of the situation, and the working class will have a possibility of coming to consciousness. But this brings us back to the small groups, because the small groups have to be alive and kicking in order to be in the process. Remember Poland in the 1980s and 90s. And the 70s. Poland had a massive working class movement which fell for the lack of any other ideology under the domination of the CIA and the Catholic Church in Poland. And they dictated the agenda of the Polish workers through that struggle. No working class organisation emerged from that. And this is what the role of the revolutionary organisations, to me, today are, that we are fighting for that future. And it may not occur in my lifetime, but it's certainly a legacy that we want to pass on to the future generations of the working class, in order that they can then achieve what the working class alone is capable of achieving. Otherwise, what will happen with the crisis of capitalism, there will be a general disintegration of the state, not just in tin pot places like Central African Republic or wherever, but in more central places like Greece, Turkey, Syria. The state will disintegrate, and we will be back to a form of warlordism and barbarism, which will throw humanity back for generations. So I don't say it will be the end of history, but it would certainly be a massive defeat for humanity as well as the working class.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. The starting point has got to be class struggle, elemental class struggle, the self-activity of the class, and that's what any socialist transformation is anchored in. It's not about bringing something from the outside. It's not about the fetish of the programme, bringing the programme from the outside the daily struggle of the working class, the material struggle of the working class. If you have that situation where you have Jacobins, red Jacobins, with their advanced consciousness, the world leadership, the handful of leaders coming to the class from the outside, that kind of elitism, it can only end in a dictatorship over workers as it did in the Soviet Union. So instinctively, elementary struggle does create socialist consciousness, does create alternative consciousness. Now, if you deny that, then you're talking then about handfuls of intellectuals and the programme, rather than something being generated by class struggle. I mean, I've read something. Nobody's actually advocated the views of this pamphlet, Class Consciousness and Revolutionary Organisation, but I did have a look at it, and it does separate the elementary struggle from communist consciousness, the communist organisation, from the daily struggle of the working class, and it does think you have to bring the programme from the outside. I think that is elitist, and it's also wrong. You see, it's all very well talking about learning the lessons of the past. The past is the memory of the class. It's got the lessons of the past. But I think that the point has already been made that there are new forms of struggle. So you can be repeating the lessons of the past, but it's historically out of place. So you're part of the problem, not part of the solution. I mean, for example, the radical left groups spend all their time trying to revive the declining, decaying organisations of the Labour Party, Labourism, and the trade unions. I read somewhere that the two bourgeois parties, two capitalist parties, the Labour Party and the Tory Party, are down to about 100,000 members each. So there's a decay of bourgeois political forms as well. So, so you need to relate to emerging forms. These people in the radical groups, SWP and so on, Left Unity, are simply repeating the lessons of the past that are no longer appropriate, as if the working class is still social democratic, still yearns for parliamentary socialism, will still respond to that kind of call, even though most of the people making that call are not social democrats. They're people who claim to be Marxists but put forward a social democratic point of view as a tactic rather than conviction. And that's never convincing to anybody, because most people think that is dishonest. Now, again, in this pamphlet, for example, it says going on strike in terms of the daily struggle of the working class is one thing, a revolutionary overthrow of the state is another. Now again, it's putting forward a false separation, artificial separation, dichotomy between the two, because let's take an example from Britain, for example. 1972, dockers were picketing the new container depots because they were a threat to their organised workplaces in the old dockyards. Now, it just so happens that the government has made that kind of picketing illegal. So these dockers were engaging in a strike to protect their livelihoods, but they found themselves up against the state. And those dockers were put in prison, the dockers' leaders. I think it was 5 of them.
Right.
There were 5 put in prison. And so then you had a spontaneous strike against that imprisonment.
Spontaneous strikes would break out all over Barry.
Yeah.
The state was in danger. I accept your point. Very good point.
Yes. So there you have any kind of revolutionary minority would have to root themselves in that fight back. As it so happens, it didn't develop much beyond that initial general strike. The state decided to retreat, found an excuse to release the dockers, invented something called the official solicitor, and released them. So strike wave receded. But you see, that was a political strike, and it just shows the false view of relationship to party and class from those who say that the working class can only attain trade union consciousness. The daily struggle is different from a struggle to overthrow the state. Learning what is to be done, character, German social democracy. And there's quite a lot of that in here as well, in this pamphlet. But anyway,
there's a criticism of Kautsky in the pamphlet.
Quite a lot of learning in there. But anyway,
reread it.
did read it before the meeting, but nobody's actually made the points from the pamphlet. So anyway, that's the way it goes.
Well, it's my turn anyway. It went Jock then Steve.
And see, this thing about high points and low points, you can't just live in the high points of the past.
I've just said that.
Yeah, did it? Yeah. Yeah, I'm just making. Well, I didn't hear you say it, but I'm just making a point anyway. Otherwise, you can't relate to the present. I mean, if you look at, often it's very difficult as well to identify the new political forms that are emerging. I mean, if you take 1905 in Russia, to give an historical reference, the Soviets, who actually understood their significance, they were the spontaneous. I think it started off by a print workers' strike, ended up in the Soviets, who actually understood its significance. Well, Lenin didn't, and certainly Trotsky didn't. Lenin thought it might be something that
A Menshevik maneuver.
yeah, I mean, he thought it might be something that a democratic republic could be based on, or would help to lead to a democratic republic. So in 1917, not only were the lessons of the past not learnt, and insofar as they were learnt, they were forgotten. It's the workers' spontaneity itself, the workers' creativity, that generated that alternative, workers' councils, to the state. It's not, even then, the World Revolutionary Party, the Bolshevik Party, still didn't understand the significance of workers' councils, and they created a state, and we all know what the consequences of that were. I mean, a lot of people say, well, it's all down to backward circumstances, but that's simply untrue, because the day after the revolution they rooted it in a government that was rooted in the old state apparatus. So, and also their idea of democratic centralism, criticised by the young Trotsky and also by Rosa Luxemburg quite correctly. That kind of thing, democratic centralism, came from German social democracy. It's basically cabinet government, and it was their version of cabinet government, which is cabinet responsibility. So that idea that you have a handful of leaders making decisions or having enormous executive power just lends itself to that kind of state building that they took part in immediately after 1917, not after the Civil War, prior to the Civil War, and immediately following the revolutionary events themselves. So I'm going to stop now so the people can come in, but again, just to reiterate this point, that it's all about class struggle, it's all about self-emancipation of the working class, it's all about self-activity, and the self-centralism of the class, if you like. That's where the workers' militants or the workers' vanguard will be located. It won't be located in the fetish about a world party. The First International wasn't a world party based on a doctrine or a programme. It was an international based on action, on solidarity, and trying to prevent scouts being brought in to various countries to break strikes and undermine workers' conditions. It wasn't an international leadership with a handful of people with a correct programme. And once you get into this correct programme and talk about the party, a fetish of the party, then you're cutting yourself off from any struggle that might emerge. I mean, I know Gramsci once said pessimism of the intelligence and optimism of the will, but I don't accept that it will inevitably take decades or whatever. We just don't know. There has been fight backs in other countries, unfortunately. Apart from the young people rioting, there's been very little fight back in the UK, and all we've had is taken strikes by the trade union bureaucracy. So, but still, in terms of an alternative to capitalism, we still have to relate to any emerging elemental, spontaneous class struggle. That's what we've got to do, rather than constantly harp on about old programs and so forth.
I think you've actually covered quite a bit of between the work and I can't concede with you both actually. I'm trying to say something just to contribute. I think, going back to what you were saying, the problem with this meeting is that we've not got the people here who are going to oppose the point of view. So, to a certain extent, we've not got the negative point of view. We've almost got the one hand clapping, if you like. So we really need to explore the contrary opinion of the working class doesn't need a political organisation. And maybe that will illustrate to a certain extent why it doesn't anymore. That argument. But I was thinking of is, what are the negatives associated with this political organisation? What can we learn from exploring these negatives? Yeah. And I think with theoretical currents like councillism, they pointed out the dangers of, I think, to a large extent what Barry's talking about, this idea of substitution. This idea of the working class political organisation actually exercising the proletarian dictatorship. And I think if there's one thing that one enormous theoretical development that has been made in recent times, it's been on that front. The political organisation, we don't need a revolutionary political organisation to exercise a proletarian dictatorship. There is an absolute distinction that, in fact, a party dictatorship has nothing to do with a proletarian dictatorship, has nothing to do with capitalist communism. Yeah, the party dictatorship, in my mind, it's the pure principle. Yeah, and I think that that is a real gain of the recent revolution, the recent path of the revolutionary movement, because as far as I can tell, at least since the 1970s, that was the prevailing opinion, that the party rules. In one of the CWO pamphlets, which I think one of the ICC pamphlets on the conferences, it's reported that the CWO, it said, black and white, very, very obvious, does the party rule? And it said CWO, yes. Now, and I brought up, and that I've been told that is not a CWO, which I accept in good faith. Yes.
It was Rob that answered yes.
Right.
Mike no drawing.
Yeah. I've recently been exploring or looking at some of the work by Dave and criticising Bordiger, and in my mind, and I think it is very, very obvious that I cannot see how you can argue against it, that both Damon and Bordiger were still talking in terms of the leading party organ actually exercising the proletarian dictatorship. Now they might have argued about how that, the exact nature of that, but I still think that both of them were saying there is no problem with the rule of the party, and so I think that that is somewhere where we moved on. Again, on what Barry was saying on democratic centralism, I think Damon speaks about democratic centralism quite critically, and he says something like we can't have a formal relationship between in the party. You can't have a formal relationship between the base and the leadership. He talks in terms of dialectical centralism. In other words, what he's trying to say is that we have to adapt it to the situation as it unfolds. So, I don't think that we make a fetish of democratic centralism. I don't think we should. But But I think though, having said all that, all that sort of like, the danger of the revolutionary organ and the way that the revolutionary organ, supposedly poses a threat to the working class, which I suppose that if the revolutionary organ is guided by revolutionary theory, which dictates that the revolutionary organisation takes power, then it does present a threat to the working class. Yeah, but I think that we can accept that the revolutionary organisation does not become the executor of a proletarian dictatorship. We can accept that the proletarian organisation does not exercise power or territorial power, but that still does not mean that the working class spontaneously generates revolutionary class consciousness. Revolutionary class consciousness understood as the perspective that the international working class has the historic mission of overthrowing capitalism and creating another type of society on a global level. I think, without going for Lenin or Kautsky, I'm not saying that Lenin didn't get it from Kautsky, and nor would I say that negates the argument. I think we can go back to Marx. In Communist Manifesto, Marx says that, basically what Damon says, no revolutionary party, no revolutionary class. I'm open to, I've got an open ear. I'll listen to the argument, but I still cannot see what is basically wrong with the Leninist formulation on the impossibility of the working class, isolated from a source of revolutionary theory, attaining class consciousness. Maybe we're agreeing, and the vocabulary is in the way. I'm not sure. But as far as I can see, I don't care Kautsky, I don't care Margaret Thatcher said it. It's still true. In my mind, the working class cannot spontaneously generate class consciousness. I just also like to say,
are you part of the working class?
Pardon?
Are you part of the working class?
I think so.
Oh, sure.
Can I say, and again, I'm part of the working class, therefore I will not shut up, because I think that we cannot substitute, we cannot pass on our authority to, we can't delegate our authority to anyone. I think that quite a lot of what you were saying about the state of capitalism seems to describe well the state of affairs in the West and this country and the other sort of like the well-established imperialist centres which have basically become parasitic and non-productive. But I'm not sure whether it would describe places like China, which to me is a very important sort of like domino in or a very important part of this argument.
Sorry, you're done.
Sorry?
You're done. Did you finish then?
Yeah.
Sorry. I missed that bit. They were out.
I'm still sitting in the book on record.
Should we have a break or have a break now?
I'm going to be fairly quick. Yes, okay. Yeah. Did you want to speak as well? I've got 3 down, so maybe we'll have these 3 then and have a break then. Is that the suggestion?
Well, I'll leave mine in that case. I don't.
Okay. Sorry. I didn't put it down and then get 4, sorry. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to come in with this bit. I'm going to count myself as a left communist. I don't particularly count myself as a good militant, really, with my history. But it's one of those discussions that I find really hard to get to grips with. I don't want to criticise anybody that's making an effort on one level. And I can listen to totally different points of view and agree almost with everybody, within certain limits. I do want to start from the basis that the consciousness is a product of class struggle, however. It's not a product of revolutionaries teaching everybody else or persuading everybody else or leafleting everybody else and gradually getting them to agree. That might happen to some extent, but that's not the explanation of waves of class struggle. That's not the explanation of revolutionary situations. And I do think, therefore, the bits I pick up on, I do agree, Steve, with some very significant bits in here, but the bits I pick up on and the bits that do feel to me to be quite individualistic, where you're talking about the need for an actual source before you can become a communist. Yes, of course we need books to read, and there's previous people that have thought about these issues. We're in a situation where you can't avoid them. You have to read what's around you and you develop that. But that is an individualistic view of the development ideas. It ignores the fact that the pressures and movements in society are the ones that make you pose questions and make connections. Just because I've read X, Y and Z, doesn't guarantee the development of class consciousness. It's those movements that I think are more important. And therefore, I'm also a bit cautious. People can come back on me because I hope I'm not going to argue for a trade union consciousness. But I think what militants do and understand and the way they're developed now in the situation they are in is a bit different to what we mean by class consciousness for the class as a whole in a revolutionary situation or post-revolutionary situation. So I'm a bit wary about this idea, what you've got down here, of class-conscious theoreticians. Yes, maybe you could count us as theoreticians. I'm not sure the class as a whole has to have, or that class consciousness means exactly the same thing when you're talking about the class as a whole. Because there you're talking about society, not academic study. You're talking about the management of society. It's a practical thing rather than an academic thing. Yeah, okay. So I'm not sure about that, and for the same reason I'm very about your formulation about party or socialism, because again, the party is no guarantee. It's one part of the process. I like what you're saying about interplay between the two. I think that's absolutely right. But the party is no guarantee, just as if you like, a wholly class struggle without a party is no guarantee either. There's nothing that's a guarantee. There's no guarantee that the party is correct in what it does. But it's that effort of trying, that effort of clarification, of developing political discussion and trying to take that forward, that's the closest you can come to a guarantee. I don't think it is, but that's the closest. If you're making the effort, you're going to get there. No, that's a bit too simple. But it's about making that effort. The word party, I think, for us is a bit of a problem, and I do wonder about that sometimes. We're in the discussion that before. There's a bit of a fetishism. We have a fear of it, or I've certainly grown up with a fear of it, and it is more than just me, because of Stalin, of what the Bolsheviks turned into. It's not more than that. I don't worry about so much when you're talking about other parties in the same way. But when I think of a left communist party, there's a big hammer behind that, which we could almost do without, really. I think we could do with forgetting and sort of thinking about more what we do now, what the role is now, and that's nothing like what Stalin turned into. That's a totally different thing entirely. So no guarantees. A party doesn't guarantee, I want to come back to that, party doesn't guarantee socialism. So I can't accept this party or socialism, because it's, yes, whatever the party does, it's going to guarantee it, The role of revolutionaries, going back to this little bit, a bit of academicism, you see those criticisms on the websites, the discussion sites. I've enjoyed discussions recently about decadence and the falling rate of profit and things. I've got quite into those themes and pushed them a bit, maybe more than I should have done, I don't know. But yes, it's very specific. There's big discussions on the ICC website about prehistory, which don't interest me at all. I haven't got down to that. I'm not interested. But people are... But that is part of revolutionary minorities' activity, I think. There are other environmental studies and whatever that get very technical, very scientific, which I can't get to grips with, but I could expect more as having its place. These, again, I think might be seen as academic. I don't think they're necessarily part of what the class as a whole will be discussing and needing to understand come a revolution. But part of the process for us meeting and discussing, because they simply contribute to us understanding what's going on in the world. It's a background to it. It might not be the core one, but it's a background to it. And I think when I was in WR, I didn't quite understand why they kept having these discussions about current situation all the time. I think I understood that afterwards, really. That is the key thing. When you go back and read about Russian Revolution and German Revolution and what was going on in 1918, 1922, the key thing seems to me is it's revolutionary at that point in time, irrelevant to exactly how they were organised and how they related to one another and what mistakes each others have made. The key thing there was their understanding of the current situation, and that current situation being highly critical, it being a revolutionary situation. And that's all our discussions really, I think, are prepared for, that for all of us, at that point in time, we can come up with something accurate to say about what's actually happening around us. That's interesting. So, Mark.
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest, my original thing was going to be aimed at anarchists, but there's no anarchists here. A little bit partially due to the fact that, partially due to the fact that probably going to some anti-fascist defence, legal defence meeting, I believe. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on what Barry said, right at the very beginning of what he said, and a bit more. You said you don't feel there's any need for political organisation, that if the working class can reach the communist consciousness, what are we actually, I was just thinking in my head, are we actually needed at all? Or revolutionary minorities needed at all? If the class can do it itself, which I actually think it can. I was actually going to, just sticking through my head of every revolution that's ever happened in certainly the 20th century and up to certainly back as far back as the Paris Commune. And in all those events, including 1905, sometimes people do talk about it being a spontaneous revolution. But actually, there were revolutionary minorities at work. Who was the leader of the Petrograd Soviet? Trotsky, for example.
Khrushchev knows that. The Menshevik was the original president.
Oh, okay. But then later on, Trotsky.
Yeah. Trotsky was jail.
I kind of disagree to some degree with what both Barry and Stephen were saying, really. I'll probably sit somewhere in between when we've been having these discussions, because I don't accept that the working class can only reach trade union consciousness, but I think to put it in that way, it's very formalistic, as if it's like they get to a certain point and then they can't stop. No, I know you did, but you haven't said that in the past. So, some discussions. And so, I don't know, I'm just going to leave it there. I'm quite enjoying listening to other people.
So, a couple more, was that okay?
Also, we have a break.
Or would you rather have the break?
I'd rather have a break.
Ronan, you alright with that?
Yeah,
I'll start off with you two.
Well, I think maybe
it was Barry coming back to our
Barry,
maybe
Barry gets it right at good time.
Do I
get it right at good time?
We all?
I don't know.
We'll start up. Barry, were you putting your name down?
Yeah.
So we'll start with you three afterwards, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, you sure? Right, what, 10 minutes? Quarter an hour?
Enough, does anybody smoke?
Yeah.
Two bag break.
Oh, you three can go out the back.
where does the power shift?
Right, is there Greek painting?
Sorry?
Is there Greek painting?
I don't think it's
Take